My guest on this TDL profile is an astronaut with 4 missions, including over 6 months on the International Space Station and 32 hours of EVAs, or what the rest of us call spacewalks, and now he's the Executive Vice President at Excalibur Almaz, a private space exploration company. Please welcome Leroy Chiao. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's begin at the beginning. What made you decide to become an astronaut?
Well, it's something I'd wanted to do since I was a kid. I was, as a kid, I was always building model rockets and model airplanes and reading books and following the early missions. But it was really the Apollo 11 moon landing. I was an 8-year-old kid at the time, and I can remember like it was yesterday. It was a hot summer day in California, and later that evening watching the lunar module touch down on the surface of the moon, and then hours later, watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the moon. And even as a kid, I knew that the world had changed, and I was just so impressed by what was happening. I said, I want to be one of those guys. I want to do what they're doing.
And those guys, like Buzz Aldrin, for example, now at that time, the path to become an astronaut pretty much went through the Air Force.
That's correct, right.
And so I'm curious what path you would advise kids today who ultimately want to be in space, what path to take, or doesn't it matter so much?
Well, when I went through, I was selected in 1990. In fact, our 20th anniversary of our selection was just a few days ago. There was the shuttle era. And so you're right. In the very beginning, it was all military test pilots from the different services that were selected to be astronauts. And you see that repeated in the Russian program and as well as the Chinese program. Those are the only 3 nations that are able to put astronauts up into space right now. But as things evolved, then there was a time when civilians started to be selected too. So that was certainly my case in the shuttle era. In 1978, they selected the first class of shuttle astronauts, which included civilians, and so by the time I came through, that was a well-entrenched way of getting into the astronaut course. So I went the engineering route. I studied engineering and applied after I got out of graduate school, and I was working at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. There was a dream that never really left me. It was always with me all through school. I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I kept coming back to, I'd really like to be an astronaut. And so I kept at it and applied, and got a phone call out of the blue inviting me to interview, and was selected and reported in summer of 1990. And so the rest, as they say, is history.
I'm still waiting for mere internet video producers to get to go.
Yeah.
All in good time, maybe through other means outside
yes,
of
absolutely.
NASA. Obviously, you had a fascination with space, and that was in part because of the Apollo program. But
right.
Why do you feel space exploration is important in a more general sense?
I think that space exploration is important for a number of reasons, and I could rattle off the practical reasons, the spin-offs, the technology drivers, things like that, inspiring kids. But really, when you come right down to the fundamental, human species is curious. We want to know what's on the other side of the mountain. We want to know what's down at the bottom of the oceans, and we want to know what's out there in space. And so I think that's why you see there's always been widespread support, public support for space exploration, because just as a species, human beings, we're curious. We want to know what's out there.
And talk about curiosity. You spent over 6+ months on the space station.
Right.
Did it feel like 6 months?
Yes, people ask, well, did it go slowly? Did it go quickly? And I tell you, what? It was about what a normal 6.5 month feels like. And it would have been terrible if we didn't have enough to do. But fortunately, there is a lot to do up there. And it might surprise you to know that most of what we do up there is maintenance work.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of maintenance, some from routine maintenance like changing filters, things like that, to unplanned maintenance, like we had to change out a heat exchanger out of the U.S. airlock that was a fairly complicated procedure and it wasn't designed to be removed, but they suspected there might be a problem with it, so actually went through a procedure to remove and replace that thing. To actually going out doing spacewalks and having to do repairs outside as well. So the bulk of our time is spent on maintenance, but of course the main purpose of the International Space Station is to be the world premier microgravity laboratory, which it is. And so we're seeing more utilization now, but even at the time I was there, while the station was still really being constructed, we did get a fair amount of science done, even though most of our work was maintenance and repairs.
So six plus months in the International Space Station. What do you do if you get stuck with a real jerk? I mean, is there any kind of profile matching before, kind of, I don't know, an eHarmony for space travel, I guess, something to kind of make sure that the crew's going to mesh well before you're up there?
Well, you touch on a very important point. Obviously, if you're in a confined area, be it aboard a space station or a submarine or out in the Antarctic wintered over, the team has to be compatible. They have to be able to get along to work efficiently. And in an extreme case, you could really have a problem. For example, in the early days of space stations, when the Russians were flying space stations on at least one and possibly two occasions, they had to end missions early, specifically because the crew was not getting along. And that's something that the Russians pay a lot of attention to because they've been flying space stations since the early 70s. Now, for NASA, we've always been on short duration flights. Shuttle missions are only about 2 weeks long at the most. And our view was that, well, we're all professionals. We can get along, even personalities that don't quite mesh. You can train together. You can get along over a 2-week flight. But when you talk about half a year together in a series of tin cans, that becomes very important. And so, really, the crews, there is thought that go into crew selection and how crews are put together. For example, as the commander of my flight, I was asked, well, here are the people that we're thinking about flying you with, and, is there anyone in there that you really would rather not fly with, or somebody you definitely would like to fly with? So I had some input into that, and the Russians really have taught the Americans a lot about the importance of matching those crews and getting compatible people together.
Now, I need you to clear up a space conspiracy. This is very important. And
Sure.
I'm not referring to those who think the moon landings are fake. I'm not referring to UFO sightings. Of course, I'm referring to the dehydrated ice cream. Now, when I go to the Kennedy Space Center as a visitor and I buy a packet of dehydrated ice cream, I'm thinking that's not what you actually eat in space.
You're right. I've never seen dehydrated ice cream in our food kits. I have tried it. People have come up and given me some, and I've tried it. And I know what it tastes like, because a lot of the meals we take on the American side are meals ready to eat, the same stuff that the military uses, and they have some kind of a dehydrated fruit bar. And to me, that's what it seems like. And I don't know if it is the same, but a lot of our food is made by the same supplier that makes those MREs. So that might be what it is, repackaged as and marketed as astronaut ice cream.
The truth comes out. Very good.
Right.
Obviously, having flown on the shuttle, and you flew on in a Soyuz as well, right?
Right.
Soyuz capsule. How do you feel about the current plans for the shuttle?
Well, I'm a shuttle hugger, as they call them. I flew 3 missions on Space Shuttle. I grew up with Space Shuttle, and it was Space Shuttle we were flying throughout the bulk of my career. But and so I have a lot of nostalgia and a warm, fuzzy place in my heart for shuttle. As you probably know, over the summer I was a member of the Augustine Committee that was reviewing the U.S. human spaceflight plans, and we looked at shuttle and looked at ways of extending shuttle because we're concerned about the spaceflight gap, during which period of time the U.S. will have no independent means of launching astronauts into space. And we concluded the only way to shorten that gap is from the left, that is to extend shuttle, keep it flying. But really the main showstopper would be the price, how much the operating cost of the shuttle is. It's fairly high. Turns out to be somewhere north of $3.5 billion a year just to support shuttle operations, even if you don't fly any shuttles. But probably most likely the shuttle will be decommissioned sometime at the end of next year, or sometime in 2011, at the end of this year in 2010, or sometime in 2011 after the current manifest has been flown out.
And switching to private exploration, when I'm thinking about the fact that you were there for 6+ months and they kept you busy, I'm wondering, even if you work out the logistics, I wonder what a realistic amount of time is for a space tourist, since one would assume they're not going to have as many duties to take care of, as it were.
Well, right, and as you know, there have been several space tourists to the International Space Station flying up on Russian Soyuz flights, similar to my profile, except that they were only there for a week and they were flying as right-seaters, that is, they didn't have any flight responsibilities during the Soyuz portions. But, they were able to participate in some of the science programs, and, for a first-timer in space, spending somewhere around a week or so in space, there's plenty to do. You can participate in science programs, you can look at the Earth mostly, take photographs of the Earth, take photographs of you doing things inside, and just experiencing spaceflight. That's pretty exciting. And what we're doing at Excalibur Almaz is we're trying to set up orbital trips of somewhere between 5 and 7 days in duration, and we plan to have some research programs on board so that we can have things for people to do. And we want to be a company that's about more than just flying people into space. We want to be contributing somehow to the betterment of mankind through research programs and things like that.
And I think there's an interesting component or backstory to what you're doing with this company. Explain for those who might not be familiar where the capsules are coming from and what your plan is for space.
Well, it's very interesting because Almaz originally was a Soviet military space program, and it was a spy program. There's a space station called Almaz, and it was the exact analog to the U.S. MOL program, the Manned Orbiting Lab, which we had considered building. We're going down the path of building. We were going to service the Gemini capsules. We had military astronauts training for those missions. Well, the Russians actually built theirs, and they operated several stations, 3 of them successfully. They flew 3 missions, 3 manned missions using Soyuz spacecraft to service them, photographed missile silos, all that stuff, I'm imagining. Dropped those film canisters out from the bottom because at the time, it wasn't just a matter of sending down packets and of digital photography. There were actual big film canisters they sent down that were snatched out of the air, under a parachute with these airplanes with that, the James Bond kind of thing in front. And so it was really pretty cool stuff. And they executed that program. They had capsules also under development. It was a rival designer named Chelomey, and he was a rival to Korolev, who designed and built the Soyuz. And he was going down the path of building these Almaz spacecraft when he ran into some political problems. And basically what happened was his station design was shared with Korolev's design bureau, who launched them as Salyuts, the civilian versions. The military versions were allowed to continue to be developed by Chelomey's design bureau. They became Almaz spacecraft, disguised as Salyuts. But the Almaz capsule, the spacecraft that would take astronauts or cosmonauts to and from the station, was canceled in favor of the Soyuz. And so these capsules that we've acquired, now, they have been flight tested 10 times, but unmanned. They never were flown manned, but they have a heritage of having been flight tested several times with varying degrees of systems on board. But the main point is that they have flown in space. It's been shown that they can come back through the atmosphere. Their heat shields work. The parachute systems work. And so that's the basis of what we're starting with. We've purchased 4 of those capsules, 2 of the space station frames, and we're in the process of refurbishing those capsules and getting ready to operate them in basically our own private space program.
And take us through the timeline a little bit, where you see Excalibur Almaz, say, 5 years out from now.
Well, I hope 5 years out from now we'll be operating. It's hard to tell right now because we're about to go out and do another major funding round, and that's the funding round we'll really need to get things going. We've got enough funding to kind of keep the company going, to kind of position ourselves, get our designs starting to gel and set, getting our plans set up, and make a presentation to investor groups to why this is going to work and why they stand to make a lot of money. And once we get that investment, then we'll actually be able to kick off all these plans and get them going. So once these plans get going, I'm anticipating in less than 5 years we'll be operating. Certainly have our flight tests under our belt, and we can leverage off the rich flight test history that has already been conducted by Chelomey's design bureaus and his engineers back in the day. We need some flight tests to validate all those data, and then we can move forward and go into commercial operations.
Very clever, not having to reinvent the wheel to
right, that's what we're trying not to do.
Very good. Now, obviously, people hear a lot about Richard Branson's plans with Virgin Galactic. Explain how this is different.
Well, Branson's plans, and he's probably the most well-known of the commercial space fellows, is to go suborbital. So he's got Burt Rutan, Scale Composites, building his Spaceship 2. And basically, it's a bigger version of Spaceship 1, heavily modified, I'm sure, but it'll go up on the same profile. In other words, it'll reach about Mach 3 in speed, go into space for probably about 10-ish minutes or so, 5 of which might be weightless, and then it'll drop back through the atmosphere like an artillery shell, not have enough velocity to actually get into orbit. To get into orbit, you've got to go about Mach 25, which is 8 plus times faster than they're going to go. And so the energy required to get up there will be a lot less, and therefore the problem is simpler to solve. Now, it's still quite a feat to get up into space, but what we're going after is an orbital program, which is quite a bit more difficult.
And do you see the initial customers, is this a craft for payload? Is this for scientific experiments, paying travelers? What's the plan initially?
Well, for us at Excalibur Almaz, the plan is to fly with astronauts and spaceflight participants on board, and of course that's going to be the most exciting. We haven't ruled out the possibility of doing any kind of cargo flights or other flights, but our core business plan right now is to get people into space as quickly as we can. And I guess that's one thing that's distinguishing us again from some of the other players, is that we're going to be trying to develop this all with private equity money instead of going after NASA funding, for example.
Mm-hmm. With privatization taking off, if you could, it's a lot to ask to sum up in a few bullet points, but where do you feel NASA should focus at this point?
Well, one of the things that the Augustine Committee, which I was a member of, recommended or put forward in one of our findings, is that the commercial sector should be given a chance to participate in low Earth access. That is, NASA, we've been going to low Earth orbit with NASA for almost 50 years. It's been almost 50 years since the first Mercury flights, and since Gagarin's flight. So the technology's there, and we should give the commercial folks a chance to succeed at that, while NASA focuses on pushing farther out, establishing perhaps bases on the moon, and start looking for a enabling technology and missions that would support going on to Mars someday with a human mission to Mars. And so one of the things we said in this finding is that, well, we really ought to give the commercial guys a chance. Of course, we don't want to sacrifice safety. Devil is in the details. We would have to figure out a way to ensure that that the commercial folks were operating in a safety manner that was consistent with what we would expect from NASA. So the challenges are there, but I think it is time to allow the commercial guys a chance to succeed.
Very good. And now bringing things back to Earth here with the technology. You've got things like there's a shuttle simulator at the Kennedy Space Center. You have Mission Space at Epcot. What have you found anything that you think that is accessible to anybody that best truly simulates the experience of takeoff?
The simulators are okay, and I'm talking about the training simulators. I haven't been to the rides down at the Kennedy Space Center, but I've heard it's pretty good. And I understand there's some things at Disney too, at Epcot. I personally haven't been through those, but I hear they're pretty good. The simulators are all right, but they don't really simulate that. It's difficult to simulate that feeling of launch, of the G's pushing you back in your seat, things like that. They can simulate, of course, vibrations. And with playing with pitch, they can kind of fool your inner ear into thinking that you're kind of getting a little weightless or something like that when you get into main engine cutoff simulation. But the actual launch itself, the G's aren't that big a deal. They're coming through your chest, even on a Soyuz where you're building up to maybe a maximum of 4.5 to 5 G's. And it's not that bad. It just kind of takes a little bit of extra effort to breathe. But really, it's more the excitement of actually knowing you're inside of a vehicle that's launching into space.
And I suppose you don't really need to you don't need to visit an amusement purposed simulator when you've done the real thing.
Well, unfortunately, I guess it does leave us a little bit, jaded's not the right word. I still enjoy taking rides and roller coasters and things like that, but I guess the surprise is gone. We have been through the real thing, and so we know what it's like, and we can make comparisons, and but the rides are always entertaining. I enjoy those rides, and the reason I haven't gone through them, I just haven't had time. Someday I would like to go through and try those rides.
And when you're waiting in line and you can go to a regular restroom, it kind of breaks the illusion of
that's right. Yeah,
what you're used to.
A lot easier using the facilities on the ground.
Now you're a Mac user, correct?
Yes, right. In fact, I was a Mac user from way back, from about 1980. What was that? 1985 or so, when I got my first Mac, and I see an old Mac in the back of you there, and I wish I still had my old Macs. I had one of the so-called fat Macs with the 512K.
Okay.
I wrote my entire PhD thesis on that thing, and when I went to NASA, ironically, I had to leave the Mac behind because NASA is not on Mac. And so I was at NASA for 15 years, and the first thing I did when I left NASA was to go out and buy a Mac again.
And as far as you know, is that still true today, that generally you're not going to find Macs at NASA?
No, generally not at NASA. Now, a lot of people at NASA have Macs at home, but all the things that are geared, at NASA are geared towards Windows-based machines.
And do Macs play any role in your current venture?
Oh, absolutely. I use Mac daily, and as far as what's going to be in space, that's TBD. We haven't determined that yet. My bias, of course, would be towards using Macs, but we'll have to kind of wait and see what's going to play well with the the systems on board and things like that.
And you're also an iPhone user, correct?
Yes, yeah, I've got my iPhone 3GS. You had carried one of the originals for a couple of years, and then it actually got stolen this last year in the summertime in Europe. It was a victim of a pickpocket, but that gave me an excuse to upgrade to the 3GS.
Very good. Any favorite apps you like to use?
I have to confess I haven't gotten that many apps, but interestingly, my kids, I have 3-year-old twins, they have shown an interest in the iPhone, and so I downloaded several of the kiddie apps, like the coloring apps and a little piano and things like that. So it's a lot of fun for them. But myself, I unfortunately don't have that many. I've got to build up a few more.
There's plenty to choose from.
Right, right. I'm just very excited about the possibilities of commercial space. Of course, commercial space has had its ups, I don't want to say that. That's too much of a pun. It's had many false starts, let me say, throughout the years. I mean, it's, the idea of commercial space, private commercial space, has been around for a couple of decades and never really has worked out yet. We hope to be the first company to do so with Excalibur Almaz. We think we have an edge since we have tested heritage spacecraft. We have a very good team in place. And, we've got a good start. We've got good seed money, and we're going to go out and look for major funding and execute this program. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that we can do this in the next several years.
You can learn more about Leroy's private space exploration plans at excaliburalmaz.com or read his personal blog at leroychiao.com. For thedigitallifestyle.tv, I'm Ryan Ritchie.